Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be my review of the first two episodes of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Now there might be spoilers for these episodes, so just beware when going into this overall video. Now I'm sure you all know what this is, but for anybody watching who doesn't know, Rings of Power is Amazon's massive prequel series to J.R.R. Tolkien's famous Lord of the Rings fantasy story, which was first introduced with his set of novels and then brought into greater cultural status with Peter Jackson's magnificent movie trilogy from 2000 to 2003, still the greatest cinematic trilogy of all time. The story is of course set within the medieval era of Middle-earth, where the races of men, dwarves and elves all combine together to destroy the last ring of power before it's consumed by the Dark Lord Sauron, who will use it to conquer all of Middle-earth. Rings of Power is set thousands of years before this era, which will focus on the forging of the multiple rings of power, how Sauron comes to rise and prominence, and also the alliance between elves and men. And whilst using characters from the source material, it must be clear that this isn't directly connected to the books or indeed Peter Jackson's films. Amazon released the first two episodes of the series on Friday the 2nd of September 2022, and subsequent installments will be released on a weekly basis after this date. Now there's been so much debate and scrutiny surrounding this series ever since Amazon acquired the rights of the franchise back in 2017 for a massive $250 million. Passionate fans of both the books and movies have been hyped and also very concerned about whether this would be another disappointing adaptation of an iconic franchise. Particularly on social media, there's been so much doomsday predictions and negative commentary lamenting the clear diversity inclusions regarding certain races and characters of the series. The scrutiny intensified even more so after the recent showing of the Game of Thrones prequel series House of the Dragon, which has attained very strong reception from both critics and fans. So after all of the hype and narrative and expectation, how is the Rings of Power series? Right now, I'd say it's mostly decent to a solid start in terms of these first two episodes. There are certain special moments, but it's also let down by some pacing issues and a certain lack of focus within its story and characterization. Visually, it looks great for the most part. There is a real large scale and scope. In terms of the production, it's very well put together. The tone, music and editing are all perfectly sound. Mostly there are no issues with the CGI or the effects that we see throughout the series. Much like Peter Jackson's movies, the CGI was used sparingly for the most part. It wasn't overloaded. It was clear to see everything that was going on. The action was staged very coherently enough. And there's also a clear intent within this series to make everything as epic and grandiose as possible as what we would associate with a Lord of the Rings adaptation. So on that front, I can't really fault the effort that's been made to put everything on screen to make it as large and immersive as possible. I will also credit the decision not to tie in directly to Peter Jackson's movies, as that would have drawn in an impossible comparison, and this series is at least trying to be its own standalone adaptation. Now there are some flaws unfortunately throughout the show, the major one being the story itself, which doesn't have quite the compelling drive or edge that you would need it to have in order to sustain an entire series. Now in the beginning of the first episode, we did get a very lengthy prologue sequence to focus on the warrior elf Galadriel, who's been on a century-long quest to gain revenge on the Dark Lord Sauron, who killed her brother during the Great War, where we see the elves had ventured out into Middle-earth to battle certain dark forces. And in terms of the character of Galadriel, you just don't fully connect with her so far. I don't know if it's lacking in terms of the actress's performance, but you just don't really connect to this character overall. She's a bit of a blank slate and a bit distant so far. In terms of these first two episodes, I just wasn't fully immersed in her overall quest to gain revenge. Now the second half of the first episode steers away from Galadriel to focus far more on other elves who are overlooking a certain village, and this direction does slow the pace down a lot. There are certain characters that we focus on who aren't really that interesting, whether it's Elrond or Arondir, who is the elfish warrior, or Barwin, who is a woman that Arondir we assume is having some sort of relationship with, and maybe this will be the central love story that we see throughout the entire series. And to be honest, I would have preferred if this first episode stayed completely focused on Galadriel, and I think this would have given the story far more focus and urgency. Over the course of the two episodes, we do spread around a lot of characters, and after a while my interest was lagging in terms of the story. The first episode especially felt very long and did drag at certain points, and I actually wouldn't recommend watching the episodes back to back. I was kind of drifting off early on in the second episode. I was just losing investment in terms of the overall story and where it was going. I do think that you would need a break, almost a certain intermission, before coming back to episode 2, just to kind of draw in your breath and just settle down again in terms of the overall story. Now, hopefully throughout the series, the characters will become far more compelling and interesting. And of course, there is the pending threat of Sauron, which was established as we saw a young boy coming into contact with an orc sword, which had the insignia of Sauron, and we could see his influence will continue to grow throughout the rest of the season. We also saw later on a meteor crash down, which caused a huge crater later on, where we saw a boy coming into contact with it. And at the end of the first episode, we will see the boy grow on to become an older man. And then later on, we will see this effect carry on throughout the rest of the second episode. So far, there is enough here to keep me invested to see what happens next. And it will be interesting to see how Sauron develops into the evil force that we would know him to be later on within the Lord of the Rings story. It will also be good to see how exactly the Rings of Power are created and forged and spread out within the multiple races. Now, it's possible that we won't see that development to maybe season 2 or season 3. The series has already been commissioned for a second season, I believe. And following the inquiring of the rights, it has been revealed that Amazon has intention to go at least for 5 seasons with this show. And whether the show sees out those 5 seasons will depend on the strength of the story and whether it can compel enough viewers to come back every single week. Now, in terms of comparisons, I'd say there really is no point in looking at this in comparison to Peter Jackson's movies, because that would be very unsuccessful, because for me, first of all, those series of films are incomparable. You really have to try and judge this series on its own. So far, I'm not so sure the characters will connect the viewers I think that they would like. But as mentioned before, at the very least, there is a very large scale and scope towards this overall series. And I think so far, the series will rely a lot on the visual aesthetics in order to keep people interested in what's going on. So overall, a decent start. I think in terms of improvements, they need to tighten up the pacing and streamline the story more. This is a show that has potential, and I think it does need a few more episodes to see exactly where it's heading. So it's not the all-conquering series or the complete disaster or abomination or disservice to the franchise, as a lot of the narrative is what you will be seeing, particularly on social media. I just think overall it's something in between. I think it's a show that still needs to find its footing. It needs to make the characters far more integral and interesting to the overall story, especially Galadriel, if she is indeed to be the main lead of the entire series. But so far, not too bad, decent, with enough there to keep me invested to see what happens next in the following episodes. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings and review of the first 2 episodes of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think this was a major disappointment? And do you see it as another mistreatment of an iconic franchise? Or were you surprised by how well the quality was in terms of the visual effects? And are you indeed very hyped and excited to see where this series goes next? Let me know what you think in the comments below. You can also catch up with my reviews of House of Dragon, the Game of Thrones prequel, and I will leave some links within the description. And I may do a further comparison piece in terms of both of the series as we reach the halfway point. Rings of Power is due to go on for 8 episodes, I believe, and House of the Dragon, I believe, is going on for 10 episodes. So they're running along very parallel, so I may do a further comparison later on down the line within the channel. And of course, when we come to the overall series, if there are any other episode standouts, I will do reviews for those, as well as a review of the season finale and also an overall look at the season itself. So look out for all of that great content within the channel later on. And of course, if you have any other TV series or movies that you'd like to see me cover within the channel, drop me a suggestion within the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you within the future. Please also hit the subscription buttons and notifications so I can provide you more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.